Dr. Clain Jones, right?
That's correct.
And so you got it on recording. So thanks for doing this webinar. I'm pretty excited about this. This is Dr. Clain Jones. You know, what you study intrigues me. If I was going to school, I'd probably be your student. And I'm currently going to be your student for the next hour, and I'm looking forward to it. Please, everyone that's watching, if you got a question, type it in, because he's here to answer them. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. So again, my name's Clain Jones. I'm MSU's Extension Soil Fertility Specialist. Right now, you should be seeing my first slide on soil health. Lindsay and Walter, are you seeing that?
Yes, we are.
Great. And so what I was asked to do today was present a 15-minute introduction, 15 to 20, on soil health, to leave lots of time for questions. And those questions could be focused on soil health, but recognizing I'm a soil fertility specialist, if you run out of soil health questions, please feel free to ask me anything soil fertility related. At the bottom of my screen is my email address. Always feel free to send me an email. And next to that is my phone number. I'm not working out of my office right now, but if you leave a message, I will get back to you on my cell. All right, so I have several objectives today. The first is to show the agronomic practices that benefit soil health. I want to really focus on ways to increase soil organic matter, because the more work that we and others do on soil health, the more we recognize the importance of soil organic matter. Then I'll describe the impact of soil pH on plant productivity and soil health, present the pros and cons of various soil health tests, and again, leave lots of time for questions, but feel free to interrupt me as I go. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end. So agronomic practices that benefit soil, the tools that you have as producers would be things like rotation, residue management, and amendments. The measurable impacts that you can make with various management practices include on soil organic matter, soil nitrogen, or what we call potentially mineralizable nitrogen, or PMN, basically how much nitrogen might become available in the next growing season. Measurable impacts would include microbes and soil microbial enzymes. The process of aggregation, where small bits of soil clump together to form larger aggregates, which are generally a good thing for soil. They prevent erosion, like shown here in the photo. Soil pH. And again, increasing soil organic matter increases many other soil health parameters. So less productivity means less soil organic matter. More productivity generally means more soil organic matter. This is a huge deal to both soil health and income. What I present here is a figure from Australia showing the effects of soil organic matter ranging from about 1.5% all the way up to 6% on what's called water stable aggregates that are greater than 2 millimeters in size. So water stable aggregates means that rain can hit those aggregates and they won't fall apart. It's exactly what you want to prevent soil erosion, also help water and nutrients and air flow into your soil. So the results of this study are pretty dramatic, meaning as soil organic matter increases just from about 1.8% up to maybe 2% and 2.2%, the percent of water stable aggregates increases dramatically. So even if you're maybe discouraged that it's hard to increase soil organic matter on your farm very much, this really shows that small increases in organic matter can make a big difference in physical attributes of your soil. If you're fortunate enough, or you've had good management where you're up in this 5 to 6% range, maybe it will be more challenging to to increase at least aggregates. But if you're up in this range, you probably have really good soil health. So again, this is the area that we're in most of Montana. I mean, most of our soils are in kind of that 2 to 2.5, 3% range. And that's also happens to be the steepest part of the curve, meaning if you have small losses in soil organic matter, you can have pretty big drops in aggregates. If you have big increases or even small increases in soil organic matter, you can have large increases in aggregates. So again, aggregation improves infiltration of water, improves root growth, and reduces erosion. This is data from a study done about 4 miles west of Bozeman in about a 16-inch annual precipitation zone over 10 years. These kinds of studies are really rare because they're so time intensive and so costly to run. But my colleague Perry Miller really recognizes the value of long-term studies, and we're actually entering the 18th year of the study this year, so we'll have an update on these data soon. What we've done here is we've evaluated the effect of crop rotation on soil organic matter represented in tons per acre. So the first thing to recognize is there's a lot of tons per acre of soil organic matter. We're up in the 25, 28, 29 tons per acre of soil organic matter. What I'm showing here at about 28 tons per acre is the soil organic matter back in 2002. We then resampled in 2012. So across the bottom here, this is a fallow wheat tilled system. Notice it has the lowest organic matter, as you might guess. We know tillage helps to decrease organic matter, and fallow, with nothing growing, will decrease organic matter. The next bar on here is fallow wheat no-till. So notice it does substantially better than the fallow till, but still lost organic matter. So just not having anything growing for 12 to 18 months makes it really hard to maintain soil organic matter. How we increase soil organic matter was in recrop systems. So this is a wheat on wheat, continuous wheat system, and a pea grown for grain followed by wheat system. Both of those increase soil organic matter compared to the baseline. Moving over to the right, the pea forage wheat system about maintained organic matter, and a pea cover crop system wheat also maintained soil organic matter. About the best system out here was a CRP system. So this is alfalfa grass, mainly alfalfa. And so it did quite well, as you might expect. A lot of the residue from perennial crops is below ground. It's not harvested off like it is with annual systems. So that remains below the ground and helps to build soil organic matter. So take-home message, though, is these increases are pretty small, right? So if you really want to increase soil organic matter, you have to be very patient, and you have to have already started or start now. Another way to look at that data from that study is one thing that I'm interested in is how much residue do you have to put into the ground in order to maintain soil organic matter? That's what we've tried to show here. So here on the horizontal axis, I put shoot residue input in tons per acre per year, so above ground shoot biomass. And on the y-axis, I plotted soil organic matter change in tons per acre per year. All these dots here are for an annual wheat system or wheat plus pulse system like I showed on the previous graph, and notice they fall in a really tight line. What this tells me is that the more shoot residue you leave, the better the chance that you'll increase soil organic matter. And it also looks like the more you apply nitrogen, these orange dots, slightly better chance that you'll increase soil organic matter. Notice that the break-even point here is about 1.8 tons per acre per year. That's quite a bit of residue. And you might say, what, why do you need to leave that much? And I'm gonna ask the audience, and I realize there might be some uncomfortable silence, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on why can't you just put down 0.1 tons per acre per year? Why do you think you need so much before you break even? And right now I cannot see the chat. I think I can see the question and answer though. So anybody can unmute or ask a question, and I'll try my best to answer it. In this case, I'm looking for an answer on why you think we need so much return to maintain soil organic matter. And Walter can answer because he's an excited student.
Well, you need that much just because it's blending in with a lot of soil, and but I am a little surprised that it's that much to be able to maintain it.
Yeah, and so
and I'm also a little confused how the pulse wheat and the forage wheat is not keeping up with wheat to wheat on that, and it must be you must be growing taller varieties of wheat than maybe we are in our dryland situations.
Right. So on the previous slide, let's just go back to that if I can. Doesn't seem to want to go backwards. Let's see about my up arrow. There we go. Yeah, so your question was why the pea grown for grain followed by wheat is not producing any more soil organic matter than wheat on wheat?
That's right. And that the forage on wheat is producing less.
Right. Yep. So I'll answer that second one first. So when we cut forage, when we cut pea forage, we're losing quite a bit of residue compared to when we only pull off the grain and leave all those leaves and all that shoot. So I think that's one reason that the pea forage wheat does no better than pea grain and actually does a little bit worse. Does that make sense? We're only pulling off the grain here, but we're leaving leaves, shoot, pods, everything else behind on the ground. Where pea forage, we're basically haying it pretty close to the ground.
And the pea cover, you're leaving everything there.
Yeah, that one I was surprised too. It's like that's leaving quite a bit, but that's a really what's called low C to N material. It's something that breaks down really quickly, and so it doesn't all go into soil organic matter. We're pulling off this high nitrogen grain. We're leaving behind what's called a high C to N residue that takes a long time to break down and basically becomes soil organic matter. So I think that's probably a big part of that difference, but it's a good question. Now let's
and then I guess that answers the question on why you need so much on your next slide, because a lot of it's is not going to convert to organic matter right away.
Exactly. A lot is food for soil microbes. So soil microbes are taking this carbon and using it for energy. And then carbon dioxide goes up into the air. So it doesn't all stay behind. So this 1.8 tons per acre per year is basically must equal about how much carbon dioxide is going up to the atmosphere. Those microbes are working all the time and not keeping all that carbon in the soil. So that's the big reason why we can't get away with less residue input, because the microbes are using it up. Any questions on that? So
we got a pretty quiet group. I haven't seen any questions at all.
Right, I haven't either. 9 participants, I see. Okay, so another question that I have is, well, what % of the residue carbon is still in the soil after 10 years? And we can actually answer that question by looking at the slope of this line. So the slope of this line means how much soil organic matter was built up versus how much residue was put down. And it turns out the slope is 0.4. That means that 40% of the residue stays behind as soil organic matter. The other 60% goes up to the atmosphere. Would be nice if more stayed behind, but we know that without those microbes, we don't have a very healthy soil. So that's just going to be about how much carbon stays behind versus gets what's called respired. Another question you might have on this graph, I'm going to ask you guys, is why is the CRP forage point so far different than these annuals? Why were we able to build soil organic matter by leaving so little shoot behind? You can answer either by unmuting or your chat or the question and answer box. No, I don't think it, for some reason, there comes my chat box.
I'm not seeing anything from anybody.
Okay. I will answer the question. I kind of did before, but basically most alfalfa biomass is actually below ground. So even though you don't grow a lot of above ground or leave a lot of above ground alfalfa, you leave a lot of those big tap roots behind, and that helps build soil organic matter. So that's why perennial crops, kind of pound per pound, tend to build soil organic matter quite a bit more than annual systems do. So another strategy for building soil health would be to diversify. So how could you do that? There's different ways. You could rotate species across time, meaning have a complex cropping system. You could have polycultures, meaning different species within the same field in the same year. You could have genetic diversity, meaning you could mix varieties within a field, or you could have something like mixed cover crops where you grow a range of cover crops in the same field. We've been studying mixed cover crops for about 8 years. By we, I mean Perry Miller, Kathy Zabinski, others at MSU. What we've basically found is that by having mixed cover crops versus sole cover crops, we get a more stable yearly production or reduced risk. So that's an advantage. If you plant, say, one species and it gets hammered by insects or it doesn't emerge, you're kind of out of luck. If you plant more species, you're going to have a more guaranteed biomass return. We also found in our studies that we grew more biomass, which means more soil organic matter, which means better soil health, when we included legumes, especially in low nitrogen soil. It's probably not a huge surprise to you. And others in Oregon have found that legumes increase available nitrogen if they represent more than about 40% of the overall cover crop biomass. So if you're trying to build nitrogen, but you only have a little bit of legume in your mix, it's probably going to be hard. You want more than about 40% to build available nitrogen. This is a figure from research done in Wyoming, where they looked at different systems and how they affected soil organic matter. On the left here, we have grazed native range, a wheat fallow that was tilled, kind of a high till, minimum till, and no till. Interestingly, unlike in our study, tillage didn't seem to affect soil organic matter. But again, just like our study, CRP increased soil organic more than these other systems, and then a grazed native system is more provided for background. So most cultivated systems are going to have less soil organic matter, but perennials are going to have more than annuals. One process that I think is really threatening soil health in pockets in Montana is the concept of soil acidification. So here's a figure that shows a field up in Choteau County where there was an area that had pH 3.8. That is really, really low. You can't grow any crop at pH 3.8. And just a few hundred yards away, the pH was 5.1, and the crop looked about normal. My fear, though, is pH 5.1 will become pH in the fours in a few years and might start looking like this in a decade or so. So the major cause, at least in ag land, is nitrogen fertilization above crop needs. Can lead to poor nodulation in legumes, so then poor nitrogen fixation. Aluminum toxicity. Aluminum is found naturally in the soil and it's released by low pH. Can affect herbicide effectiveness and how much stays behind. Increase disease. We can prevent it by doing any practice that increases nitrogen use efficiency. We can include legumes to supply nitrogen and reduce end needs, and we can plant crops like, say, malt barley that require less nitrogen than, say, spring wheat.
There was a question from the chat box.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions to organically convert rangeland into fertile cropland?
That's a hard one. The first is, can you get a good seed bed? It's really a physical thing if you have a lot of sod. So people do get challenged with having, a good enough no-till drill that they can either slice through that sod, or a lot of people find they have to till that. So that first year is going to be rough, whether you till or try to no-till. After that, probably fertility could be one of your bigger issues, where rangeland often, even though it has high organic matter, often has low nitrogen, maybe hasn't been fertilized ever. And so it's going to require some good soil testing and probably working with a crop advisor. So those are the two, biggest areas I can think of, that physical breaking of the perennial sod, and then converting over to annual and watching your nutrients.
You said no-till. How do you convert range to cropland no-till organically?
Right. So organically, I missed that adjective in there. So no, you wouldn't have the weed control. So I missed the organic part. Sorry about that. So yeah, you're gonna be tilling that range. You're gonna hope through tillage that you get a decent nitrogen flush, but a lot of times I do see pretty low nitrogen in range, and so you're gonna, perhaps your first year, you're gonna want a sweet clover. You're gonna want maybe a spring pea, some legume to build up your nitrogen supply. Good question. Were there any other questions on chat? I'm not able to see the chat in this mode. No, okay. This was work done in Saskatchewan, looking at the effects of different cropping system on the number of organisms in the soil, both fungi in grayish purple and bacteria in light blue. Starting at the left, we have a fallow wheat system, very low organisms. Wheat, very low. Lentil wheat, quite a bit higher, so almost twice as high the fungi and 2 to 3 times the bacteria. Flat pea wheat, vetch wheat, and pea wheat all had pretty similar high fungi, high bacteria. So pretty dramatic effects by moving out of a wheat-only system. There's a few standard soil health tests out there. The Haney test you've likely heard of. The Cornell test is a little more extensive. Haney relies a little bit more on lab tests. Cornell gets into more some physical parameters, and both can be measured by different laboratories within the United States. I see their major advantage is being able to measure and monitor soil health over time or between fields. They're useful to assess the effective management or evaluate problem areas. Standardized methods may not yet be in place for them, meaning they're trying to serve most of the country, and we're still figuring out what different parameters within them mean. So unfortunately, currently there's no calibration between test values and fertilizer recommendations for northern Great Plains. For an organic producer, that's probably less of a big deal. For conventional, that's more of a big deal. And so some of these tests, like the Haney test, will supply fertilizer recommendations. They generally appear to be much lower nitrogen fertilizer recommendations than based on standard tests that have been calibrated with trials in Montana. One question I had, and I worked with Darren Boss up at Northern Ag Research Center on, is how much does the Haney test versus standard fertility testing explain winter wheat yield variability? So my thinking was, if these are doing a good job at basically helping the soil, they should also help yield. So when I looked at the Haney test, I found that it explained about 15% of the winter wheat variability, and dissolved organic carbon was the most important variable. When I looked at the standard test, it only explained 25% of the variability, bigger than Haney, but not that much more. And there I found that the 6 to 24-inch nitrate level was the most important. When I combined the two, I found that that explained about 40% of the variability. So perhaps kind of the best future soil tests might be a combination of these more conventional standard tests and these newer soil health tests. So how can I manage for healthy soils? It's really important to know what your current soil properties are and only add amendments as needed. You don't want to be adding, for example, gypsum if you have a lot of calcium and sulfur already in your soil. You certainly want to avoid compaction, reducing tillage and traffic when the soil is wet. You want to feed your microbial community, which means increasing organic matter content by minimizing fallow and possibly adding cover crops, and with moderate grazing, meaning you don't want to be losing all of that above ground biomass to grazing. And maintaining cover with either vegetation or residue will help preserve water and will also help with soil health. And then again, like I showed with my data, you really need to be how does it sound? Got a message.
Something happened to your sound.
Yeah, it just said my it's still off.
It's echoing and not working. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Don't know what that was because I didn't really do much. You can still hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Working good.
Great. So, and with that, I wanted to thank you. I'll let you know that I have a web page that you can always go to for more information and see if you have any questions.
Can you jump back one page? I think
you lost some of
we
that.
didn't discuss this one very much.
Okay. Meaning my sound cut off.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you heard, Walter?
Well, you said know your soil properties and only add amendments as needed.
Okay.
And then we didn't get much on the compaction and what have you from there.
Okay.
Is that right, Lindsay?
Yeah, definitely reduce your tillage and traffic when the soil is wet. Feeding the microbial community is important by minimizing fallow and possibly adding cover crops. Just grazing moderately so you don't reduce too much of your hay or your shoot residue, and maintaining cover with vegetation or residue. And then finally, you really need to be patient. As I showed, it can take a long time to build soil organic matter and soil health. But the sooner you start, the better, the sooner you'll see results. And with that, any questions?
So let me see if we got, I don't see any in the chat box. I guess I've got a question for you. You know, and this came up in the plant breeding webinar, that a lot of research at our experiment stations is focused on conventional farming.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very little research or data from organic production systems. Are you doing much research and data on organic soils?
Right now, I am not, but I can't speak for all of MSU. I know that Perry Miller, Bruce Maxwell, there's others here who are working in organic systems. I've worked on organic systems like at Bob Quinn's place and also here west of Bozeman, and on things like phosphorus soil amendments, cropping systems. The genetics are something that it might be an opportunity time to push, because, you know, Luther Talbert just retired, the new breeder, when he or she is hired, might be looking for new ideas. Phil Bruckner, the winter wheat breeder, will be retiring soon. And so I think there's going to be opportunities with newer, younger faculty looking for ideas and recognizing that organic is a big part of Montana agriculture.
So we have a question here. Someone wants to fall graze their hay fields. And if they do that close to the first frost versus not at all, am I hurting my soil?
No, I don't think so. You know, from a grazing's perspective, you're not removing very much, and close to first frost, I don't really view how that might hurt your soil health. I think I don't think it would matter much whether you do that close to first frost or not. That's just a gut feel.
And that's because, as you pointed out earlier, that on these perennial grasses and hay, that a large percentage of the organic matter is actually coming from the roots down below.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And like in our CRP system, because we don't have animals at our research center, that residue was hayed, and so it was removed. Whereas grazing, you're going to be returning some back to the soil in the form of organic matter. But yeah, you summarized my talk very well, that most of the residue is in the roots rather than in the shoots.
And I guess, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about how soil health can help mitigate greenhouse gases and mitigate extreme weather, climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it surprised me a little bit how much carbon was escaping in this process. And I guess, is that, and I think, is that more from the annuals than the perennials, or is that in both cases?
It would be.
I'd like to dig deeper a little on that topic.
Sure. Yep. So yeah, let's actually go back to this graph here. So yeah, if we look here, this being the break-even point, if you have to return 1.8 tons per acre per year, that means there's 1.8 tons per acre per year of residue plus soils that's being respired, meaning microbes are using it and putting CO2 back. So that's quite a bit, and that's just a natural. It's a natural process. The previous graph shows really how hard it is to build soil organic matter. So even in our best systems, we're hardly budging soil organic matter over 2002 levels. But maybe it's because I'm a human and I'm impatient, and we need to think about these systems in the long term. They took thousands of years to build soil organic matter, 10,000 years of prairie grasses and forbs. Then in about 60 years of cultivation, we brought those soil organic matter levels down pretty substantially. And that was when we had other things to worry about than climate change and resilience and soil organic matter. So I think it really takes that long-term thinking, multi-generational thinking, that this is something, if we want to do, we can do, but we're going to have to be patient. Did that answer your question though, Walter?
Is anyone doing research with the microbes? What's that?
Is anyone doing research with the microbes?
Anybody doing research on the efficiency of the different types of microbes as far as if we can bump that from 40-60 to 50-50 by just being more efficient at digesting it in the soil?
Mm. So Jed Eberly up at Central Ag Research Center in Moccasin is a soil microbiologist, and he thinks about these types of questions a lot. Gut feel, though, is that microbes need a certain amount of carbon for their bodies, and then a certain amount of carbon is going to go up to the atmosphere. So it's a really good question. I mean, I think of fungi as being a little better at keeping carbon around than bacteria, but both of them certainly also essentially eat that carbon and put it up to the atmosphere. So that would be a really good question. My concern would be probably the systems that send less CO2 up to the atmosphere might be less biologically active systems, which isn't necessarily something we want to be striving for. It might be better to adopt management practices that leave more residue behind, maybe a little bit more minimum tillage, a little less tillage, a little less fallow. Those are things that we know from the data will really increase soil organic matter.
Well, and it seems to me focusing on the crops that have more underground than above ground, because it's that above ground residue that escapes us quicker and faster in the breakdown process. Am I wrong?
It's near the surface. There's also those annual crops might only have 20% of their residue below ground. So if you harvest a lot of that above ground residue, you're losing the majority of the carbon. Whereas crops like perennial grass, perennial alfalfa and sainfoin, you're leaving more of that below ground, where you're right, it's more protected. It has less of a chance of being respired and burning off as CO2. But that can be a pretty major change for a producer, right? If you're a organic, say, lentil, spring wheat producer, to convert to perennials, it means a different system, maybe livestock, maybe buying a swather, and so it's a little bit different world. It's not easy, is all I'm saying, but it would be better to have maybe a perennial annual rotation, like say 3 to 5 years of perennial, and then maybe 3 to 5 years of annual, than just continuous annual.
And I mean, to that point, Minnesota is working, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, doing a lot of plant breeding and selection of perennials that can replace the annuals in our cropping system right now and produce the same
Right.
results. Only like you say, we have way more underground than above ground that we lose.
Right. So the breeding of both perennial wheats and perennial other grains
Pulse crops.
that can produce decent yields is really the big challenge, right? Because perennial crops often produce small seeds, some of them not edible by humans. And so, yeah, there's a lot of breeding going on in Kansas, Minnesota, other places in the country to try to make more like a perennial wheat. And those would have a lot of sustainability and soil health advantages. Other questions?
I'm not seeing anybody popping up with anything here.
Okay.
And so I guess I as a conventional grain pulse farmer, and right now, as you know, a lot of farmers. I mean, 20 years ago, everybody grew wheat and barley and hardly anything else. And now we've added a lot more into our dryland rotations. But what would your number one recommendation to a conventional farmer in Montana to improve their soil health? I know you've talked around it a lot here, but
number one would be, if you're 100% annual cropping, would be to convert to perennial. If you have any fallow in your system, to really try hard to figure out a continuous non-fallow system. Those would be probably the two biggest points that I would make. And I realize there's economics involved with that, and it's easy for me to say in my lab here on campus, but if soil health is a major goal, continuous cropping if you have fallow, some perennial systems if you're an annual cropper.
Keep your soil alive.
Correct. Yeah, more. The only way you're getting carbon in there is by photosynthesis. And when that soil sits without anything growing in it, it's not building carbon, it's losing carbon.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't see any more questions from the group. I was really looking forward to this webinar, and you didn't disappoint.
Good.
And I do appreciate it's kind of a different world we're all living in right now. And normally I'd have probably got to seen you at a show at the research stations or some other seminar that's around. And I just appreciate you taking the time to join our group to discuss this on a Zoom platform. And like I said, we're going to be putting this up on our webpage so that those who didn't participate today will still have an opportunity to go and look at it later.